The courtroom was packed to the edges, buzzing with quiet whispers and the soft clicking of reporters' cameras. Everyone had come to witness the downfall of Lila Cole, the pregnant wife of millionaire tycoon Ethan Cole. To most people, it was just another high-profile divorce, but the tension in the room felt thick enough to cut. Ethan entered first, dressed in a sharp, tailored suit, confidence radiating from every step. Two elite lawyers followed him, carrying thick folders, while his glamorous new girlfriend clung to his arm like a trophy. He didn't even glance at Lila as he took his seat, already acting like the victory was guaranteed. Lila stood alone at the opposite table. Her dress was simple, her hair pulled back neatly, her hand resting gently on her pregnant belly. There was no lawyer beside her, no stack of legal files, just her unborn child, and a calm that seemed almost unnatural in a room built to intimidate. The judge adjusted his glasses and looked at her. "Mrs. Cole, do you have legal representation today?" Lila's voice was soft but steady. "No, Your Honor." A ripple of murmurs ran through the courtroom. Ethan let out a laugh that was far too loud. He leaned back in his chair, shaking his head. "Of course she doesn't," he said smugly. "She doesn't have a cent to her name. She thought she could walk in here and challenge me without a lawyer." His lawyer smirked. His mistress covered her mouth to hide a laugh. Lila felt the eyes of everyone in the room burning into her, judging her, pitying her. Slowly, she placed her hand over her belly and took a breath. "It's okay," she whispered, more to her baby than anyone else. "She's coming." The judge called for order, but Ethan was still grinning, convinced he had already won. What he didn't know was that this was only the beginning. Before the lawyers, the money, and the courtroom humiliation, there had been love. Real love. Lila remembered those early days clearly, even now. Ethan hadn't always been a powerful millionaire. Once, he had been just an ambitious man with big dreams and empty pockets. Back then, Lila had believed in him when no one else did. They met when he was still working out of a tiny office, chasing deals that often fell through. Lila had supported him emotionally and financially, even taking on extra work so he could focus on building his company. She cooked for him, encouraged him, and stayed awake beside him during long nights when doubt threatened to crush his confidence. When Ethan finally struck success, everything changed, but not in the way she had hoped. The man who once thanked her for every small sacrifice slowly became someone who barely noticed her at all. His success brought arrogance, and with it distance. Meetings replaced dinners. Luxury replaced warmth. Then came the other woman. Younger, glamorous, and impressed by Ethan's wealth, she slipped into his life effortlessly. Lila had felt the shift long before she had proof. When she finally confronted him, her hands were already resting on her growing belly. "I'm pregnant," she told him, hoping it might bring him back. But Ethan only looked annoyed. He chose the mistress without hesitation. He cut off Lila's access to money, pushed her out of their home, and told her she'd get nothing in the divorce. Alone and pregnant, Lila had walked away with nothing but quiet determination. He thought he had destroyed her. What Ethan didn't realize was that he had just pushed her into the strongest version of herself. Back in the courtroom, Ethan sat like a king waiting for his crown. His lawyers whispered strategies into his ear, flipping through pages of documents that detailed every asset, property, and investment he owned. To him, the case was already finished. Lila had no lawyer, no money, and no visible support. It was only a matter of time before everything was officially his. He leaned forward, his voice dripping with mockery. "Your Honor, this is a waste of the court's time. My wife clearly doesn't understand how the real world works. She has nothing. I have everything." The judge shot him a warning glance, but Ethan only smiled. He enjoyed this. He enjoyed watching Lila stand there alone, knowing she had no one to defend her. His legal team pushed for total control over the shared properties, the bank accounts, and even future earnings. They even suggested limiting Lila's financial support after the divorce, arguing she was no longer part of Mr. Cole's successful life. Ethan's mistress sat behind him, scrolling through her phone, already planning shopping trips and luxury vacations. To her, Lila was nothing more than an obstacle that was about to disappear. But Lila didn't look defeated. She stood quietly, her posture steady, her eyes calm. While Ethan was busy boasting, She was thinking about something else. Someone else. The judge called for a brief delay before continuing the hearing. The room filled with low chatter. Ethan laughed again, confident and careless. "She probably thinks a miracle is going to save her," he muttered. Lila looked down at her phone for just a moment, her lips barely moving. "Not a miracle," she whispered. "Just the truth." Lila's fingers moved slowly over her phone, careful not to draw attention. The courtroom buzzed with quiet conversations while the judge reviewed paperwork, but to her, everything felt distant, muted. All she could hear was the steady rhythm of her own heartbeat and the faint movements of the baby inside her. She typed just 2 words. "It's time." Then she pressed send. No dramatic gestures, no nervous glances, just a calm certainty that whatever was about to happen could no longer be stopped. Ethan noticed her looking at her phone and scoffed loudly. "What, are you texting some imaginary lawyer now?" he said, loud enough for several people to hear. Laughter rippled from his side of the courtroom. Lila didn't respond. She lifted her eyes and met his gaze. There was no fear in them, no desperation, just quiet confidence. For the first time, Ethan hesitated. Something about her calm made him uncomfortable. He was used to seeing her upset, emotional, or defeated. This version of Lila, silent and unshaken, didn't fit the story he had built in his head. The large wooden doors at the back of the courtroom stood closed, but Lila glanced toward them briefly, almost as if she were counting the seconds. Ethan shook off the strange feeling and leaned back in his chair, still smirking. "This is embarrassing," he muttered. But Lila's hands rested protectively over her stomach as she waited. Whatever was coming through those doors would not just change the case. It would change everything. The heavy courtroom doors creaked open, cutting through the murmur of voices like a blade. Every head in the room turned. Even the judge looked up. A hush fell, thick and sudden. A tall, elegant woman stepped inside. Her silver-streaked hair was perfectly styled, her posture straight, her presence commanding. She moved with the quiet authority of someone who didn't need to announce who she was. People simply knew. Whispers spread like wildfire. That's Margaret Hale, the legal strategist. She never loses a case." Ethan's smile vanished. His lawyer stiffened. They knew that name. Everyone in the legal world did. The woman walked straight toward Lila. The contrast was striking, the young, pregnant woman and the powerful, composed figure beside her. The stranger placed a gentle hand on Lila's shoulder. "I'm here," she said softly. Lila let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The woman turned to the judge. "Your Honor, I apologize for the delay. I am Margaret Hale, and I will be representing my daughter, Lila Cole, in this case." The courtroom erupted in gasps. Ethan shot to his feet. "Your daughter," he blurted out, stunned. Margaret met his gaze, her eyes sharp and unwavering. "Yes, Mr. Cole. My daughter. The woman you thought was alone." The judge nodded respectfully. "Ms. Hale, you may proceed." Ethan's lawyers whispered frantically, their earlier confidence evaporating. The man who had been laughing minutes earlier now looked pale, sweat forming at his temples. Margaret took a seat beside Lila, opening her briefcase with calm precision. "Let's begin," she said. And in that moment, Ethan realized the power dynamic had just flipped. The woman, he mocked, had brought the most formidable legal mind in the country into the room. His victory had just turned into a nightmare. Margaret Hale stood slowly, her presence commanding immediate silence. She adjusted her glasses, then placed several thick folders on the table. The sound echoed in the courtroom like a warning. "Before we discuss custody or division of assets," she said calmly, "we need to clarify one very important fact." Ethan crossed his arms, trying to regain his confidence. "This should be good," he muttered. Margaret opened the first file and held up a document. Years ago, when Mr. Cole was still struggling financially, an investment was made into his company through a private trust. That trust was created in Lila's name. Ethan's smirk faded. "That trust," Margaret continued, "grew along with the company. While Mr. Cole was busy signing deals and building his empire, he failed to read the fine print of one very important contract." She slid the paper across to the judge. "According to this legally binding agreement, Lila Cole owns 51% of Cole Enterprises." The courtroom erupted. Gasps, whispers, stunned silence. Ethan's face went white. "That's impossible," he shouted. Margaret turned to him slowly. "It's not impossible, Mr. Cole. It's documented." Lila had never said a word about it. Not during their marriage. Not when he cut her off. Not even when he humiliated her in court. Margaret continued, "Which means my daughter is not asking for a share of his wealth. She already controls the company." Ethan's lawyers flipped through their files in panic, realizing they had been fighting on the wrong side of the battlefield the entire time. The judge looked stunned as he read the document. "This changes everything," he said. Ethan stumbled back into his chair, his empire suddenly no longer his. And Lila, still silent, finally met his eyes. For the first time, he understood how badly he had underestimated her. The courtroom that had once been filled with Ethan's smug confidence now felt like it belonged entirely to Lila. Margaret Hale stood tall beside her daughter, every word she spoke landing with precise, devastating force. "Since Mrs. Cole is the majority shareholder," Margaret said calmly, "she has legal authority over the company's finances, properties, and future operations." Ethan's lawyers tried to object, but their voices sounded weak, almost desperate. The judge raised his hand for silence and motioned for Margaret to continue. "We are requesting full legal custody of the child, complete ownership of the marital home, and financial compensation for emotional and financial abuse." Ethan shot up again. "This is ridiculous. She has no right." Margaret turned to him slowly. "She has every right. You removed her from her home, cut off her financial access, and attempted to publicly humiliate her. All while she was pregnant." The judge's expression hardened. One by one, the facts were laid bare. The abuse, the financial manipulation, the betrayal. The mistress shifted uncomfortably in her seat, suddenly realizing the man she had attached herself to was crumbling. After a long pause, the judge finally spoke. "This court finds in favor of Mrs. Lila Cole." The words echoed through the room. "Full custody is granted to Mrs. Cole. Ownership of the marital residence is awarded to her. Mr. Cole is to provide financial restitution as well as ongoing support." Ethan stared forward in shock. The victory he had been so sure of was gone. His empire, his reputation, his control, everything was slipping through his fingers. Lila placed her hand over her belly again, tears quietly filling her eyes, not of sadness but of relief. For the first time since this nightmare began, she was safe. And Ethan was finally facing the consequences of underestimating the woman he tried to destroy. Ethan slumped back in his chair, the courtroom a blur around him. The words of the judge and Margaret's calm, relentless presentation replayed in his mind like a hammer striking again and again. He had thought he was untouchable, invincible, and clever. But now, everything he had built felt like it was crumbling beneath him. His lawyers shuffled papers frantically, whispering in desperate tones, trying to find some loophole, some technicality, some way to save his image or regain control. But it was too late. Lila had already secured the legal upper hand, and the documents she controlled left no room for negotiation. The mistress, who had sat proudly beside him only hours before, now looked away. The thrill of power had evaporated. She realized that she had attached herself to a man who had just been unmasked for arrogance and folly. Ethan felt rage, shame, and fear all at once. Every mocking word he had thrown at Lila came back to haunt him. Every assumption of superiority, every sneer, every laugh, none of it mattered now. For the first time in his life, he was powerless. The empire he had thought was solid had shifted, and he could do nothing to stop it. Even the judge's final words of admonition lingered, echoing in his mind, underestimating the strength, intelligence, and foresight of others, especially those you think are vulnerable, can have catastrophic consequences. Ethan Harrington, once a man who believed he controlled everything, now understood the harsh reality. Some losses cannot be reversed, and some lessons are learned only through total collapse. The courtroom had emptied, leaving only Lila, her mother Margaret, and a few close friends who had witnessed the triumph. The air was heavy with the scent of polished wood and fading tension, but for Lila it felt light, almost celebratory. She touched her belly gently, feeling the tiny, rhythmic movements of her unborn child. Each kick was a reminder of what she had protected, what she had fought for without ever raising her voice or losing her dignity. 4 months, she had endured humiliation, betrayal, and fear, but now she was free. Margaret smiled at her daughter proudly. "You did this, Lila," she said softly. "You stayed calm. You prepared. You never underestimated yourself." Lila smiled, feeling a mixture of relief and quiet empowerment. She had more than just her freedom now. She had security, respect, and a future she controlled entirely. The empire that Ethan had so arrogantly believed belonged to him was legally hers, and she had the power to decide what to do with it. Outside the courthouse, the sun was shining, casting a golden glow across the city streets. Reporters tried to get comments, but Lila and Margaret moved past them with poise. She no longer needed validation from anyone. Her victory was complete. Every step she took felt purposeful, measured, and confident. For the first time in a long while, she could imagine a life filled with possibility without fear of manipulation or betrayal. As she placed her hand over her belly again, a small smile spread across her face. "We're going to be okay," she whispered. Lila walked out into the sunlight, the world wide open before her. Strong, protected, and unstoppable, she had reclaimed her life. Ethan's humiliation was complete, but more importantly, her own story had only just begun.